I poured my brother's $5,000 wine down the lab sink. Then I filled the crystal decanter with something else. Something that had been sitting in my failed experiments for 3 months. That night, my brother Julian drank it in front of 150 wedding guests, declaring it a masterpiece. His face twisted, but he forced a smile and poured glasses for everyone. Then a man at table 9 stood up, and Julian's entire world collapsed. But before I tell you how I served him his own arrogance on a silver platter, drop your name and location in the comments below. I feature channel subscribers as characters in every story, and subscribe so you don't miss out. To understand why I, Sienna Vance, was wearing a servant's uniform at my own winery, we have to go back 2 weeks. I was in the North Block, kneeling in the dirt, examining the Cabernet vines. This is my sanctuary, the place where I can breathe. The Vance estate isn't just a business to me. It's a living, breathing organism that I've nurtured for 10 years. I know the pH level of the soil in every acre. I know exactly how the afternoon breeze hits the hillside to cool the grapes at just the right moment. My hands are permanently stained purple from grape skins, my knuckles rough and calloused from pruning shears. I don't look like a glamorous CEO. I look like a farmer, because that's what a real winemaker is. The silence of the morning was shattered by the roar of an engine. A bright red sports car tore up the gravel driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled onto my pristine vines like a layer of contempt. I stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from my knees, watching as the car screeched to a halt just 10 feet from where I was standing. Out stepped my brother Julian and his fiancée, Tiffany. Julian was 38, 4 years older than me, but he had the soft, unlined face of a man who had never done a day of physical labor in his life. His hands were pale and smooth, the nails professionally manicured. He wore loafers that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Julian spread his arms wide, spinning in a circle like a game show host revealing a prize. "Babe, look at this," he shouted to Tiffany. "Is this perfect for the reception or what? We can put the DJ right there in the vines." Tiffany stepped out of the car, wobbling slightly on her stilettos as they sank into the soft soil. She adjusted her oversized sunglasses, looking at my vineyard like it was a shabby roadside attraction. "It's cute," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "But it smells like, I don't know, dirt?" I felt my jaw tighten. "It's called terroir," I said, walking toward them with measured steps. "The soil, the climate, the ecosystem. It's what gives the wine its character." Julian jumped slightly, as if he hadn't noticed me standing there. "Sienna, there you are," he said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Great news. We decided to move the wedding venue. We're doing it here. Isn't that amazing?" I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I realized he was serious. "No, you're not," I said flatly. "This is a working farm, Julian. We're 2 weeks away from harvest. I can't have drunk people trampling the crop." Julian's smile vanished like smoke. He walked up to me, invading my personal space, and I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the faint scent of entitlement. "Listen, Cy," he said, lowering his voice to that patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. "Dad left the estate to the family trust. Technically, I have just as much right to use it as you do." I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You have a right to the dividends," I corrected him, keeping my voice level. "I run the operations. I am the head winemaker, and I say no." Julian laughed, a cold, dismissive sound that made my skin crawl. "You're an employee, Sienna. You play in the dirt and make wine. I handle the big picture, the business side." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't make me call the lawyers and freeze the operating budget. You know I can do it." I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides. He knew exactly where to hit me. "You wouldn't," I said, but my voice wavered. 20 families depend on that harvest paycheck, Julian. If you freeze the accounts, I can't pay the crew." He shrugged, as if 20 families were an accounting error. "Then maybe you should be more cooperative. It's just one day, Cy. One little party. I looked past him at the vines, at the clusters of grapes that were just beginning to reach peak ripeness. 2 weeks, that's all I needed. 2 weeks of peace. But if he froze the budget, the crop would rot on the vine. The crew would go unpaid. Everything I'd worked for would collapse because my brother wanted to play Lord of the Manor for his Instagram followers. Fine, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. One day, no access to the production areas, and you pay for the cleanup. Julian clapped me on the shoulder, hard enough to make me stumble. Great, I knew you'd see reason, he said, already turning back to Tiffany. Oh, and Cy, try to clean this place up a bit. It looks like a farm. He laughed at his own joke as they climbed back into the car. Tiffany didn't even look at me as they drove away, kicking up another cloud of dust that settled onto my vines like a layer of insult. I stood there for a long time after they left, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were shaking, and I shoved them into my pockets to hide the tremor. If he froze the accounts, I couldn't pay the harvest crew. 20 families depended on that paycheck. Single mothers, men with sick wives, kids saving for college. The crop would rot on the vine, and their children would go hungry because of my pride. I couldn't let them suffer for my pride. So I swallowed my anger and went back to work. 3 days later, I received a formal email. The subject line read, "Planning meeting, 2 p.m., your tasting room." The wording was deliberate. Your tasting room, as if I still owned anything. I arrived 10 minutes early, hoping to establish some control over the space. But Julian was already there, sitting at the head of the conference table in my office like he owned it. The wedding planner, a thin woman with a tablet and an air of forced enthusiasm, sat to his right. Tiffany was examining her nails, looking bored. When I walked in, Julian didn't stand up. He didn't introduce me as his sister. He didn't even look at me. "This is Sienna," he told the planner, waving a hand in my general direction. "She manages the grounds. Just the caretaker, basically." I felt my face flush hot. "I'm the head winemaker," I said, my voice sharp. "I run the operations here. All of them." Julian sighed, as if I were a child interrupting adult conversation. "See, can we not do this right now? We have a lot to cover." The planner looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "So, Miss Vance, you're the owner?" "No," Julianne cut in before I could answer. "The estate is held in a family trust. I'm the primary decision maker for events and hospitality. Sienna handles the manual labor." The planner nodded, making a note on her tablet. I opened my mouth to object, to correct him, to scream that I had built this winery from the ground up while he was playing stock trader in the city. But Tiffany spoke first. "Oh, perfect," she said, looking me up and down with open disdain. "Since you're staff, you can help with the service during the reception. We're short on servers because Julian spent the entire budget on the flowers." She said it so casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I am not serving food at my own winery," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. Julian leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs with deliberate ease. "Come on, Sienna, be a team player. Unless you want me to reconsider that new fermentation tank you asked for." My blood ran cold. The new fermentation tank wasn't a luxury. The old one was leaking, contaminating batches. Without it, I'd lose the entire 2024 vintage. Months of work, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Julian knew exactly where to hit me. He'd been watching me fight for scraps for years, and he knew every weak point in my armor. "Fine," I said, the word barely more than a whisper. Tiffany clapped her hands together. "Wonderful. We'll have uniforms sent over. Black and white, very classic." I excused myself before they could see the tears of humiliation burning in my eyes. I went straight to my office and called Mr. Henderson, the majority owner and our family's old business partner. He'd known my father for 40 years. He'd been at my college graduation, my first harvest, my father's funeral. I explained everything, my voice shaking with anger and shame. I expected him to be furious. I expected him to call Julian and tear him apart. Instead, he chuckled, a low, knowing sound. "Let him do it, Sienna," Mr. Henderson said. "Julian has been claiming credit for your success for years. Every award you've won, every review, every bottle sold. He tells people he's the visionary behind it all." "So you're saying I should just take this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I'm saying give him enough rope," Henderson replied. "Let him throw his party. Let him play king for a day. The world will see exactly who he really is." "He wants me to act like a servant," I said. "Then serve him," Henderson said, and there was something in his voice that made me pause. "Serve him exactly what he deserves." The line went quiet for a moment. "Do you trust me, Sienna?" I thought about it. Mr. Henderson had never steered me wrong. "Yes," I said. "Then trust me now. Let this play out. I promise you, it will be worth it." The week before the wedding was chaos. Delivery trucks blocked the tractors, forcing the crew to haul equipment by hand. Decorators were nailing garlands into my antique oak barrels, the ones I'd imported from France at great expense. Julian's friends arrived early, treating the estate like a free hotel, leaving trash in the vineyard and cigarette butts on the fermentation room floor. I retreated to the cellar whenever I could, needing the cool silence of the underground space. I was sitting on the cellar steps, exhausted, when a memory hit me without warning. Julian, age 10, standing in the vineyard with our father. Dad was teaching him how to prune the vines, showing him the proper angle to cut. Julian's small hands struggled with the shears, and he cut his thumb. Blood dripped onto the soil, bright red, against the dark earth. I ran to get a bandage, but Dad stopped me. "Let him finish the row," Dad said. "A winemaker doesn't quit." Julian looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, and whispered, "It hurts, see." I knelt down beside him and held his small hand in mine. Together, we finished the last 3 vines. When we were done, he hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You're the best sister," he said. "I'm going to make you proud someday." That was 24 years ago. Now, he couldn't even remember my name in front of strangers. I pressed my palms against the cool stone of the cellar wall and let myself cry. Just for a minute. Then I wiped my face and went back to work. The day before the wedding, I was inspecting a cask of Petit Verdot when I sensed someone behind me. I turned to find a man standing in the shadows. He was in his 60s, wearing a tweed jacket that looked worn but expensive. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something in the way he moved, the way he looked at the barrels, that told me he wasn't part of the wedding crew. "You shouldn't be down here," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "The tour is upstairs." The man didn't move. He was staring at the barrel I was working on. Then his eyes moved to my hands. My fingernails were broken and rimmed with dirt. My skin was stained dark purple from the grape must, the color so deep it looked like bruises. I'd tried everything to scrub it off, but it never fully faded. Julian had once told me my hands were embarrassing. "Those are beautiful hands," the man said softly. I blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" "They are the hands of a worker," he said, stepping closer into the light. "A creator. You don't just supervise this wine, do you? You fight with it. You bleed for it." I felt a lump form in my throat. For years, Julian had mocked my dirty hands, told me I looked like a migrant worker, said I was an embarrassment to the family name. This stranger saw them as a badge of honor. "I'm Sienna," I said, extending my stained hand. He took it in both of his grip firm and warm. "I know who you are, Miss Vance," he said. "Your 2019 Pinot Noir had a structure that made me weep. The balance between earth and fruit, the finish that lasted for minutes. It was transcendent." I stared at him. No one talked about wine like that, except other winemakers. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to my hands. I hesitated, then nodded. He turned my hands over gently, examining the purple stains under my nails, the calluses on my palms. "These stains are your credential," he said quietly. "The purple under your nails? That's not dirt. That's devotion." My eyes burned with unexpected tears. "How long have you been fighting alone?" he asked. My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Since my father passed. 4 years." "And your brother?" I laughed, a bitter sound. "He thinks wine comes from a grocery store. He thinks I'm just the help." The man's expression darkened. "Then he doesn't deserve to stand in this cellar." Before I could ask his name, Julian's voice echoed down the stairs. "Hey, who's down there? Get out. This area is for VIPs only." The man offered me a small, conspiratorial smile. "I'll see you tomorrow, Sienna." He disappeared into the shadows before Julian could see him. I stood there in the silence, my heart pounding. For the first time in 4 years, I wasn't alone in my fight. Someone saw me. Someone understood. I pressed my stained hands against the cool oak barrel and let myself cry again. Just for a minute. Then I went back to work. The wedding day was a nightmare of pink tulle and bad manners. Guests in stilettos were sinking into the soft soil of the vineyard rows, snapping stems as they stumbled through my carefully tended vines. Julian was treating the staff like servants, snapping his fingers for more champagne, sending back appetizers because they weren't fancy enough. True to his threat, he made me wear the black catering uniform. I walked through the crowd offering crab cakes, head down, teeth clenched. Every step felt like swallowing glass. "Excuse me, miss," one of Julian's fraternity brothers sneered at me, his voice loud and slurred. "This wine is too warm. Get me some ice." I stared at him. "You don't put ice in a Cabernet," I said automatically. He rolled his eyes and laughed. "Just do your job, caretaker. Julian said you were difficult." I felt my hands start to shake. I wanted to tell him that the wine he was insulting had won 3 international awards. I wanted to tell him that I'd spent 18 months perfecting the blend. But I didn't. I took a deep breath and fetched the ice. "Give him enough rope," I repeated in my head like a mantra. The humiliation continued for hours. Guests treated me like furniture, talking over me, snapping their fingers, making demands. Julian walked past me twice without acknowledging my existence. Tiffany asked me to refill her water glass, then didn't say thank you when I did. I kept my head down and kept serving. But inside, something was building. A cold, quiet fury that had nothing to do with heat. The breaking point came just before the toasts. I saw Julian leading a group of his loudest friends toward the heavy oak door of the private reserve cellar. My stomach dropped like a stone. That room was climate-controlled and padlocked. Inside was the Phantom Vintage, a single barrel of Syrah I had been aging for 5 years. It was my masterpiece, the culmination of everything I'd learned. It was destined for the World Wine Competition next month. Market value? About $5,000 a bottle. Emotional value? Priceless. I ran toward them, but I was too late. I heard the crunch of wood splintering, the sound echoing through the cellar like a bone breaking. My heart stopped. I knew that sound. It was the antique lock on the private reserve cellar, the lock my father had installed 30 years ago. I burst into the room just as Julian pulled the bottle from its cradle. The cradle was empty. My eyes moved to his hands. He was holding the bottle by its neck like a club. The wax seal, the one I had applied myself 5 years ago, was already broken. Bits of red wax littered the floor like drops of blood. "Julian, stop!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "Put that down. You have no idea what that is." He spun around, the bottle in his hand, grinning like a shark. "Relax, sis. I promised the boys the best stuff. Since I own the place, this is mine anyway." "That wine isn't ready," I pleaded, desperation flooding my voice. "It needs to breathe. It needs respect. It's 5 years of work, Julian. Please." He sneered at me. "Always so dramatic, see? It's just grape juice." He grabbed a corkscrew from the shelf and drove it into the cork with brutal, clumsy force. Pop! The sound echoed through the cellar like a gunshot. He tilted the bottle and took a swig, straight from the neck. My heart stopped beating. He grimaced, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Ugh, intense. Kind of bitter. He turned to his friends, waving the bottle. Hey guys, grab some plastic cups and that bottle of Coke from the mixer bar. Let's make calimochos. A calimocho. Red wine and Coca-Cola. He was going to mix my $5,000 masterpiece, the soul of my life's work, with soda. Something inside me died in that moment. Not anger, not heat. It was cold. Absolute zero. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel the floor beneath my feet. 5 years. Every morning at 6 a.m., checking that barrel. Adjusting the temperature by fractions of a degree. Tasting, testing, praying. The sister in me was gone. The winemaker took over. Fine, I said, my voice dangerously calm. If you're going to serve it properly. Let me decant it for you. It needs to aerate to handle the, mixer. Julian laughed, handing me the bottle. See? She knows her place. Eventually. Make it quick, caretaker. We want this on the head table for the speeches. Of course, I said, my voice flat. I'll bring it right out. I took the bottle and walked out of the cellar. But I didn't go to the decanting station. I went to the lab sink at the back of the production facility. Sitting on the counter was a glass carboy labeled in my handwriting, Test Batch 404, Do Not Drink. It was a failed experiment from 3 months ago. I'd been testing a new bacterial culture to enhance complexity. The culture had gone wrong. It wasn't poisonous, but it wasn't wine anymore. It was volatile acid, acetic acid, all the compounds that turn wine into vinegar. Essentially, it was very expensive, very oaky salad dressing. My hands were steady as I poured the real Phantom Vintage into a sterile container. I sealed it and placed it in the temperature-controlled safe. Then I filled the crystal decanter with Test Batch 404. The color was a deep, murky red. The smell? Sharp enough to strip paint off a wall. But to an amateur nose, it might just smell strong. I walked back into the banquet tent, head high, carrying the decanter on a silver tray. I caught the eye of the man in the tweed jacket sitting at table 9. He watched me place the decanter in front of Julian. He saw the dark glint in my eye. He nodded once, a silent permission. And now we are back to the moment where Julian called me the caretaker. He finished his insult, the crowd laughed, and then he reached for the decanter with the confidence of aching. Now, Julian announced, standing and pouring a generous amount into his glass, I want to share a taste of my private reserve. This bottle is worth more than most of your cars. He swirled the glass aggressively, spilling a bit on the white tablecloth. To me, he shouted, raising the glass. He tipped it back and took a massive gulp. I watched his throat work as he swallowed. I saw the exact moment the liquid hit his palate. His eyes watered involuntarily. His lips puckered like he'd bitten into a lemon. The acidity must have been burning his esophagus like battery acid. But Julian was committed to the performance. He slammed the glass down and gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. Wow, he wheezed, his voice strained. Powerful. The tannins are incredible. You can really taste the money. The guests oohed and ahed, nodding along. Let me try, babe, Tiffany said, reaching for the glass. She took a delicate sip and immediately gagged, but quickly forced a smile. It's so complex, she managed, her voice tight. Very dry, very sophisticated. It was the Emperor's new clothes in liquid form. No one wanted to admit it tasted like salad dressing, mixed with regret. Julian poured glasses for his friends, each of them taking tiny, polite sips and pretending to enjoy it. This, Julian preached, holding up the glass of vinegar like a trophy, is what a real winemaker produces. He looked directly at me. Not the grocery store trash Sienna makes. This is art. That was the signal. At table 9, a chair scraped back with a deliberate, echoing sound. The man in the tweed jacket stood up. The room went quiet, not because anyone recognized him, but because of the sheer authority radiating from his presence. Actually, the man said, his voice carrying without effort across the tent, "That is not wine." Julian squinted at him, his face flushed from alcohol and vinegar. "Who the hell are you? Sit down, old man. This is a private event." The man walked toward the head table with measured steps. Every eye in the room followed him. "I am Arthur Sterling," he said. A gasp went through the room like a wave. Even the fake rich people knew that name. Arthur Sterling was the most influential wine critic in the Northern Hemisphere. One review from him could make or destroy a winery. His palate was legendary. His integrity was absolute. Sterling reached the head table and calmly took the glass from Julian's hand. He sniffed it and grimaced with elegant disgust. "Acetic acid," Sterling said, listing the faults like a coroner reading a cause of death. "Oxidation, volatile compounds, bacterial contamination." He poured the contents onto the floor. "This is vinegar, young man. Rotting grape juice. You just drank spoiled runoff and called it a masterpiece." Julian turned purple, his face contorting with rage and humiliation. "You don't know what you're talking about. I made this. This is my wine." "No," Sterling cut him off with surgical precision. "You didn't make anything." He turned to me, and the room followed his gaze. 150 pairs of eyes landed on me, the caretaker in the black uniform. "Sienna Vance is the only winemaker on this estate," Sterling said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the table. "I came here today to meet the genius who created the 2019 Pinot Noir that scored 98 points. I found her cleaning up your mess, wearing a servant's uniform." He looked at my hands, still stained purple. "She has the hands of a master." Then he looked at Julian's soft, manicured hands. "You have the hands of a thief." Before Julian could explode, sirens wailed in the distance. A black SUV pulled up right onto the lawn, tearing through the decorations. Mr. Henderson stepped out, followed by 2 police officers. He walked straight up to the head table, his face carved from stone. "Julian Vance," Mr. Henderson said, his voice cold enough to freeze wine. "You are trespassing on private property." "This is my family's land," Julian screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "Not anymore," Henderson said. He slapped a thick folder onto the table, the sound echoing like a gavel. "This is an invoice for the damage to the cellar door, for the venue fee you never paid, for the attempted theft of a vintage valued at $5,000 per bottle." Julian's face went white. "She served me vinegar," he shouted, pointing at me with a shaking finger. I stepped forward, my voice calm and clear. "I saved the wine. You drank the decoy. That proves you don't know the first thing about what we do here." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "But thank you for the tasting notes. Intense. Bitter. Very accurate self-assessment, Julian." Tiffany looked at the invoice, looked at the police, and then looked at Julian. She stood up slowly and pulled off her engagement ring. "You told me you owned this place," she hissed. "You told me you were rich. You told me you were important." She dropped the ring into the glass of vinegar residue. Plink! She walked out of the tent, her heels clicking on the wooden floor. She didn't look back. The police escorted Julian away in front of his 150 guests. He was still shouting about how he was a visionary, how this was all a misunderstanding, how I had sabotaged him. They put him in the car, and he pressed his face against the window, screaming my name. I watched the car disappear down the driveway. I felt nothing. Arthur Sterling approached me as the guests began to leave in uncomfortable silence. "Miss Vance," he said, extending his hand, "I would very much like to taste the real Phantom Vintage. When you're ready." I shook his hand, and for the first time in hours, I smiled. "I'd be honored, Mr. Sterling." He handed me his card. "Call me when this circus is over. I have a proposal for you." He left, and I stood alone in the wreckage of the wedding. 6 months later, I stood on a stage in Paris. The flashbulbs were blinding, the applause deafening. Arthur Sterling handed me the golden trophy, the weight of it solid and real in my hands. "Winemaker of the Year," he announced to the packed auditorium. I wore a black gown, elegant and simple, but I hadn't covered my hands. The purple stains were still there, faint but visible under the stage lights. I gripped the heavy trophy and stepped up to the microphone. "Wine never lies," I said, my voice steady. "It tells you exactly where it came from and how it was treated. People can lie about their skill, their passion, their contribution, but the fruit always tells the truth." The crowd erupted in applause. Back at the estate, things are quiet now. Julian is facing charges for attempted grand larceny and property damage. The family trust cut him off completely after reviewing the evidence. Last I heard, he was working as a bartender at a chain restaurant 3 states away. Apparently, he got written up for putting ice in the Merlot. Some people never learn the difference between a drink and a crime. I'm sitting on my porch now, watching the sunset over my vines. The harvest crew finished 2 days ago, and it was a record yield. I have a glass of the real Phantom Vintage in my hand. It's perfect. Notes of blackberry, leather, and a finish that lasts forever. Sterling was right. It made him weep. I didn't scream at Julian that day. I didn't fight him, or argue, or beg. I just let him taste his own arrogance. And it tasted like vinegar. So here is my question for you. My brother says I ruined his life over a drink. He says families should support each other, even when they make mistakes. But I think stealing my work and mocking my profession isn't a mistake. It's a choice. Did I go too far by humiliating him in front of everyone? Should I have just stopped him quietly and avoided the scene? Or was serving him that vinegar the perfect poetic justice he deserved? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of vintage revenge, please hit that like button and subscribe. I'm going to finish this glass now. Cheers.